The book of Daniel is viewed as a book of prophecy by a lot of religions, but Bart Ehrman is a biblical scholar on this subject, okay? He knows what he's talking about. Reads Hebrew and Greek fluently. I have the book here called Armageddon, What the Bible Really Says About the End by Bart Ehrman, and it addresses the book of Daniel there. Back in the day, they had a genre of writing called apocalyptic genre, and apocalyptic writing was a style. It was like, it's kind of like sci-fi, fantasy, romance, that type of thing. It's just another style. It wasn't meant to be prophecy. It was meant to be apocalyptic genre. And people wrote in that genre for a variety of reasons. Because they wanted to catch the reader's attention, because they wanted to make it like a sci-fi story, because they wanted to communicate a point without saying it directly. They didn't want to be persecuted. A billion different reasons. It was just a genre of writing that existed at the time. And Daniel has apocalyptic genre writing. So does the book of Revelation. And so does Ezekiel, I think.
The Bible talks about a 7-head, 10-horned beast in the book of Revelation and in Daniel, right? But that 7-head, 10-horned beast, we find out, is a literal thing. It's going to be a world government. In fact, the United Nations has already become that, a 7-head, 10-horned beast.
Oh, this fascinates the hell out of me. This is a Jehovah's Witness belief right here. The UN is a 7-head, the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Anyways, I wanted to talk about the book of Daniel a little bit. It was written in about 167 BCE. That's around the time that the story of Hanukkah was taking place. But the book of Daniel claims to have taken place in, 600 BCE or something like that, when the exile took place, I think, or shortly after the exile. We know for a fact it was 167, though, because he talks about King Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a king of the Roman Empire that ruled over that area where the Jews lived. Anyways, Antiochus was an absolutely terrible king. He was awful. He persecuted Jews terribly, like forced them to erect an altar to Zeus in the temple, burn pork as a sacrifice in the Jewish temple, and he forced people to stop circumcising their kids and things like that. Basically just intentionally making Jews' lives miserable. Now, the book of Daniel talks about the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, and then it talks about a little horn that sprouts from the top. And then the little horn came out of it, being King Antiochus, speaking vulgarities and obscenities about God's people or whatever. It also says that God crushes the little horn under his heel, and then the horn comes back, and then he dies again, something to that effect. Antiochus died. People kept coming back and claiming that they were Antiochus. They kept saying, "Oh, I'm the guy, I'm taking control again," when it wasn't him. So they said that the little horn was coming back because they believed Antiochus was going to return to wreak havoc on the Jews, but God will destroy him finally and completely. It's all just apocalyptic writing. It's not actually prophecy. It wasn't talking about today. It's talking about back then. Antiochus, not the United Nations, 2,000 years later. Yes, here we go. Let me just read like a little excerpt from Daniel, okay? From his explanation of the book of Daniel, Bart Ehrman's, from this book, Armageddon. The apocalyptic vision of Daniel. Daniel 7 begins by describing a dream and visions that Daniel had in the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon. From a historical standpoint, this is a disheartening beginning, since there never was a Babylon king named Belshazzar. But that's one of the problems ancient authors had when claiming to be someone living centuries earlier. It's hard to get all those names and dates straight. First sign that it's not as old as it claimed to be, the book. The point of the chapter is not the name of the king, however, but the night vision itself. Verse 2. Daniel sees the 4 winds of heaven whipping up the great sea, i.e. the Mediterranean, and out of it emerge 4 horrible beasts, one after the other. See also Revelation 13. The first is like a lion with eagle's wings. Its wings are plucked off, and it's made to stand on the ground like a human. This is all apocalyptic writing. It's all symbolic stuff. It's not literal. Not meant to be literal or to apply to today.
Lord, just pray you just open hearts and minds right now to hear your word for what it says. It's not metaphors and similes.
You catch what he just said? It's not metaphors and similes. He says that specifically because he believes that the Bible at no point ever uses metaphors. Ever. So he's saying in his prayer, He knows that God doesn't use metaphors, that the earth really is God's footstool and Jupiter is his hairbrush. The second is like a bear raised up on one side with 3 tusks in its mouth along with its teeth. It is told to devour many bodies. The third is like a leopard with 4 bird wings on its back and 4 heads. It is given dominion. Finally, Daniel sees the fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. As opposed to the others? This is verse 7. This one is the worst of the lot. It has iron teeth, and it devours, breaks into pieces, and stomps whatever is left. The beast has 10 horns. This is the beast that Odell was talking about just now. But as Daniel looks on, another small horn comes up, and 3 of the original horns are plucked out to make room for it. This small horn has eyes and a mouth that speaks arrogant things and makes war on the holy ones. Remember, that one is Antiochus, the king. As Daniel looks on, he has a vision of God, the Ancient One, or an Ancient of Days, in his throne room in heaven. God is said to have pure white hair, a throne of flames with a stream of fire flowing from it, and many, many thousands of people around to serve him. While Daniel observes this magnificent sight, he hears the arrogant words, "The small horn keeps speaking," Antiochus. But then the fourth beast is destroyed and burned with fire. The other beasts are also removed from power, but not yet terminated. Finally, Daniel sees one like a human one, literally one like a son of man. That was the literal translation, I guess. Coming with clouds of heaven. This one appears before the Ancient of Days, who gives him dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is the one that shall never be destroyed. Now, bear in mind, what they're talking about right now is the kingdom of God, right? There were 2 different understandings of kingdoms in the Old Testament. There's the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of God. Belief is that you'd go to heaven if you were, if you fulfilled all this stuff. But the kingdom of God was supposed to be a real, actual, literal kingdom that existed here on earth in the Middle East. In 1000 BCE, David controlled the area and eventually died and gave it to King Solomon, baby cutter King Solomon. David united the area. Up to that point, it had not been united. It had not been a single kingdom. The reason that Israel wanted to hold that whole area is because it was the land bridge between Africa and Asia. And any trade that went between them had to pass through that spot. The Levant is what it's called. Now, naturally, anybody trading goods is going to go through the country that has the smallest tariff, the smallest charge to go through. But if Israel existed as an entire country and controlled all of it, they could decide what fee to charge. So David finally united the entire area, according to the Bible, which we have to take with a grain of salt. But I think it's probably accurate that David probably was real. When David died, he gave it to Solomon, and Solomon acted like an idiot, and it shattered to pieces into different countries again. But the claim is that Israel is going to come back and become a kingdom again and be led by God's chosen guy, i.e. his anointed one, to be king, his prophet, his Messiah. Jesus was expected to take control, political control over Israel and become king of the kingdom of God right there in Israel. And he died, and it suddenly made no sense that he, was crucified because he was supposed to become the king. What happened? So they came up with an explanation. Oh, he'll be back. Just wait. He'll come back, and he'll be appointed king then. That's where the whole Christian theology came from. Anyways, so what Daniel is talking about here is the kingdom of God, the actual physical kingdom in Israel. This one appears before the Ancient of Days, who gives him dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. Talking about the king of Israel. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, i.e. Israel will never be broken up again. It will always be under the control of the country of Israel. And his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. As often happens, this is Bart Ehrman talking again, as often happens in these apocalypses, the seer, Daniel, can't make a bit of sense out of what he's just seen. But also often what happens, a divine figure is standing by an angelic being who can explain everything. The explanation is simple, at least in principle. The 4 beasts represent 4 kings that shall arise out of the earth. Verse 16. Who then is the one like a son of man? He represents the Holy One of the Most High, who shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever. Remember what I said? The Son of Man is the one that takes kingship over Israel and unites the entire Levant area under his kingship. I'll unpack what all that means in a moment. I already unpacked it. But first, it's important to see how the chapter ends. Daniel is especially interested in the fourth beast, more horrifying and powerful than the others. By the way, the unpacking that I just gave you came from this book, so I already unpacked it, as in I don't need to read that section. I explained it already. Nearly everything I know about the historicity of the Bible came from Bart Ehrman, among some others, but primarily Bart Ehrman. So if I'm telling you something historical about it, it's probably from one of the books I read by him, and I read a lot. Daniel's especially interested in the fourth beast, more horrifying and powerful than the others, and in the horns on its head, in particular the little horn that speaks arrogant words. The angel tells him that this beast is a fourth kingdom that will ruthlessly devour and trample the whole earth. Back then, at the time, empires were hard to rule. There was no, perfect empire. It took weeks to transfer messages from one end of the empire to the other. So you'd set up an empire with kings across the entire thing, with provinces that those kings controlled. And those kings paid tribute to you and obeyed your laws and everything else. Every now and then you'd get a civil war where the king decided, hey, what am I doing paying tribute to this guy? I'm just breaking off and forming my own. He'd have to have an army to fight it off in a few weeks or even a couple of months when the empire found out that he had done that. But anyways, Antiochus was operating effectively as an autonomous king over Yehud, which was what they called Israel at the time, I believe. I think that literally translates to Jude. Anyways, let's keep reading here. So the fourth kingdom that will ruthlessly devour and trample the whole earth. The horns represent 10 kings who will arise to rule the kingdom, and the little horn will be the final king who will usurp the others. And the arrogant words, they are most important of all, as they provide a key to interpreting the passage. Quote, he, the final king, shall speak words against the Most High, shall wear out the holy ones of the Most High, and shall attempt to change the sacred seasons and the law, and they shall be given into his power for a time, 2 times, and half a time. Verse 25. This is the verse that Jehovah's Witnesses use to calculate out that 1914 is the day that Jesus came back to earth or whatever other nonsense. That's just not what that verse is talking about at all. It just wasn't. But God will enter into judgment with the beast, and all dominion will be taken away from this little horn, and he will be completely destroyed. Then, quote, the kingship and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. Okay, so next, he gives the interpretation of the verses, like the correct interpretation. Let me just read a little bit of it here so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. This is Bart Ehrman's explanation of what that was talking about. This passage will seem as baffling as the book of Revelation, but it's important to remember that it, like all books from ancient Judaism, is addressing readers of its own time. Like the later readers of Revelation, the original audience of Daniel would have had little difficulty understanding its symbolism. The short explanation is this. The Jewish people at the time of the book's writing, in the 160s CE, were experiencing severe persecution under the rule of the Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes, who was working to force them to abandon their customs and traditions and adopt Greek culture called Hellenization, and religion as a way of making his large kingdom more culturally unified. This opening chapter of Daniel's visions shows that Antiochus, the little horn, will fail, that God will destroy him, and that the Jewish people will become rulers in his place. That's what this book was talking about. That's what the verses were about. You may not have seen that explanation coming, but it's been the standard scholarly understanding of the passage for a very long time, and for compelling reasons. For one thing, the chapter almost certainly could not have been composed during the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BCE, when it was claimed. It's not written in Hebrew, the language of Judeans at the time, but in Aramaic, a language that became widely used in Israel only starting in the Persian period later. Even more important, Daniel makes clear references elsewhere in the book to the rule of the Syrian monarch Antiochus Epiphanes, 175 to 164 BCE, including a detailed description of his reign in Daniel 11:21 to 45. How could he possibly have known about Antiochus ahead of time? It was written then. And if it wasn't written during Antiochus' reign, then it wasn't about then it was about a future date set in 167, not 2023. To explain all that requires some historical background. And then he goes into it a little bit. If you want to read the book, it's actually really fascinating and gives a lot of interesting insight into the verses, what it was about, and all of that other stuff. Fascinating stuff. Definitely worth a read, in my opinion. But that should give you some idea of why what Dean Odell just said was absolutely absurd. Now let's keep listening to what he said and break it down a little bit more.
The Bible talks about a seven-head, 10-horn beast in the book of Revelation and in Daniel, right? But that seven-head, 10-horn beast, we find out, is a literal thing. It's going to be a world government. In fact,
it was a literal thing. It was a government. Antiochus Epiphanes in 167 BCE, the basis for Hanukkah, the story of Hanukkah, where they were fighting off the Maccabean War. They were fighting off the kingship there, and they finally took control of the temple and won the Maccabean revolution, where they were like, what would you call the Maccabees? They were like a militia, a violent militia that was trying to take Israel over again, and succeeded, obviously.
The United Nations has already become that, a seven-head, 10-horn beast. You have the 5 on the permanent council. You have the P5 plus 1, which is Germany, makes 6, and then the EU head comes in when they have a serious problem, like the Iranian nuclear deal. You have 7 heads, and then under that, you have 10 rotating positions.
Isn't it fascinating how he can just pick out anything and apply it to Christianity and find some way in which this was prophesied like a long time ago?
The UN, that's going to end up being a world government, has already 7 heads and 10 horns. So even though there's symbolic language at times in the Bible, it's talking about something that's real, okay? And that was what we need to agree on. But
well, when they're using, what he's talking about isn't symbolic language. It is apocalyptic writing. The Bible definitely uses metaphor a lot. Absolutely insane. Tell me what you think about it in the comments.